Hi, this is Groups 5 presentation on the characteristics of feudalism. Between the 8th and 17th century, a social system called feudalism took effect in Europe. The relationship between a lord and a vassal was established for loyalty, protection, shelter, and food. This was signified by a ritual of homage, the kneeling of one knee before the lord, with an oath of fealty. Religion was not only religious but had political and social power after the fall of the Roman Empire, resulting in later turmoil. This presentation will cover the beginnings of feudalism, the feudal social structure, the relationship between lord and vassal, and important structures of the feudal system. Starting with the beginnings of feudalism, feudalism rose as a result of the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 BC. The idea first developed in the 8th century within the Carolingian Empire. It did not become widespread in Europe until the 10th century, where the majority of the continent were Christians. People needed protection from barbarian invaders such as the Vikings and Magyars. Roman soldiers were not available to them as the empire had fallen, and there were also no laws protecting them. Therefore, people turned to lords for protection and act on their behalf in exchange for service. One of the important characteristics of feudalism is its feudal structure. Feudalism was a division of social classes that formed a hierarchical pyramid. Feudalism was a system that encompassed the giving of land by the king to a noble. The vassal would then give his loyalty and aid to the king, the aid being military services or courtships. The nobles held wealth and had armies that supported the king, which presented knights, who received fiefs from the nobles. Knights were given peasants and serfs to serve them and give them food. Although serfs and peasants were at the base of the pyramid, they were not the same. One of the most important roles in feudalism include the vassal and its lord. A vassal is the individual who accepts the portion of land. A vassal is hereditary, so upon the death of the father, their sons would inherit the land as well as his military duties. The lord is the man who grants the fief to the vassal. Some vassals did not have fiefs but lived at their lord's court as his household knights. Certain vassals who held their fiefs directly from the crown were tenants-in-chief and formed an important feudal group, the barons. Focusing on the relationship between the lord and vassal, as the lord grants a portion of the land to the vassal, a feudal contract is created. The bond is created with a ceremony that is served to solemnize the fief. It consists of two key elements: fealty, an oath of allegiance and pledge of service to the lord, and homage, an acknowledgement by the lord of the vassal's tenure. In the ceremony, the vassal knelt before the lord and placed his hands between those of the lord as a sign of subordination. Then the lord raised the vassal to his feet and kissed his hands to symbolize their social equality. The relationship between lord and vassal depended on mutual respect. The lord has the duty to provide the fief for his vassal, to protect him and do him justice in court. The lord also provides the vassal with a plot of land. The vassal is also vested with the power to lease the land to others per profit. The military service exchange usually amounts to 40 days service, but the terms may vary case by case. If military service is not a condition, the lord has the right to have taxes paid by the vassals in lieu of service. We have mentioned the word fief several times, but what exactly is a fief? A fief is a unit of land that is exchanged for service. It is an arrangement between a lord and vassal. A person became a vassal by pledging political allegiance and providing military, political, or financial service to a lord. A lord possessed complete sovereignty over land or acted in service of another sovereign, usually a king. This portion of land is divided to those lesser than the lord. They are divided monks, knights, and lesser noblemen. Fiefs are also held by women, but their husbands would fulfill the duties in place of their wives. One class I like to focus on is the serf and the peasants. Although they were at the bottom of the pyramid, most people fell into this class. The land was worked on by serfs, who are tied to individual plots of land and forbidden to move or change occupations without permission. The lord may claim a portion of the produce as taxes and fees. They also may be tied to work a certain amount of days on the lord's fields in exchange for the right to work their own lands. Peasants were free men and carried out services for wages and could become knights or earn education for their children. Although the king was placed at the top, he truly had no sense of power. The king did not hold the power of the people. He only had power where loyalties lied with nobles. The true holders of power were the nobles and the church. The nobles controlled the knights, which was the only sense of defense for the kings. The king was only answerable to the pope, because only the pope could determine a king to be unfit for the people. This happened as a result of the Roman Church being the only standing remnant of the Roman Empire. The people granted the church with political and social sovereignty. The Pope held vicar on earth, which meant that the Pope is God's substitute or messenger on earth and granted people their lands. Within the clergy of the church, there also exists a structure just like we mentioned before with the social structure of feudalism. The church included secular and regular clergy. The secular clergy included the pope, bishops, and priests. They lived among the people in town, villages, and cities which were full of power and greed. Oftentimes, these convents and monasteries were in rural areas away from larger population to maintain purity and banish temptations from evil. Monks were considered the smartest and most humble of all people. They were the only ones who could read, write, and understand classical Greek Latin. They also taught children, prayed rigorously, and participated in other religious activities. They also had to partake in vows of poverty, vows of silence, and vows of chastity. Although some nuns could read, a majority of them couldn't. Nuns instead spent most of their time praying or caring for the poor and sick. As mentioned before, because the church had political power, here is some points I'd like to make about politics in the church. With the fall of the Roman Empire, the only thing that was left was the Roman Catholic Church, which was meant to guide the people. That being said, the Pope became one of the strongest political figures, helping with political and social issues. Being that the Pope was at the top of the pyramid, he received many donations and controlled about 1/3 of all lands. The nobles and kings gave the donations as acts of piety or for the education of their children. There began to be a power struggle between leaders such as lords, kings, and church leadership. Political leaders began to exert control over the church. This is when lay investiture was created, which is the act of non-church officials giving church rank positions to regular nobles. This created a rift between the people, as kings and nobles would give church jobs to friends and families, not for religious devotion, but for wealth, status, and greed. When issues like this arise, it contributed to the corruption of feudalism. Now I want to talk about some structures that were vital within the feudal system. The manor is the lowest operational unit in the feudal system, but they are great examples of feudal communities and how they were set up. The manor was usually controlled by a lord, typically of a rank knight. He lived in the manor house and controlled the land and its workers. The manor house was mainly a residential property not built for attacks or defense, unlike the castle, which we'll cover after this. It was comprised of services and farmland ran by workers, which included peasants and serfs. It also had a place of worship. Looking at the image to the right of the slide, looking at number 1, that's the manor house, and number 2 is the church. Looking from number 6 to 8, those include some services such as a bakery, a mill, and a blacksmith. Now with the castle. A castle was the fortified home for feudal nobility. Its purpose was not to protect a large urban population but protected a noble, his family, and his servants. It served as a base for the noble soldiers to oversee the local land or countryside. It also provided defense from invading forces. It was an economic, administrative, and legal center of local control. Nobles who held huge fiefs or fiefs in widely separated areas needed or had more than one castle. So concluding this presentation, the meaning of feudalism has expanded since the 17th century. Now it's commonly described as servitude and hierarchical oppression. Feudal government was an arrangement between individuals, not between nation-states and citizens. While the individuals might be loyal in theory to the king or noble family, there was no strong legal tradition to prevent them from declaring war on each other. As issues like this continued to arise, feudalism eventually started to decline in Europe within the 15th century. Now here is our works cited page. I hope you enjoyed listening to our presentation and found it informative.